Americans spend hundreds of billions of dollars on medication each year. To keep up with an ever-growing market, pharmaceutical companies are outsourcing a large number of their clinical trials to clinical research organizations, or CROs. Clinical trials are research studies performed on human subjects, and CROs are big business.
The clinical research organization industry is around $30 billion today.
The top players are based in the US, but they seek participants across the globe. CROs now test drugs and vaccines in more than 115 countries.
The outsourcing really has escalated in the last 20 years. There are now 20 times more foreign clinical trials than there were back in 1990.
Fault lines travel to India, a growing destination for the industry, to investigate the multinational companies and international organizations involved in clinical trials. With more than 1 billion people, India has no shortage of potential test subjects. International pharmaceutical companies and CROs say India has a huge population, and that is why it is attractive for clinical trials. But what they don't tell you is that India also has huge poverty and a growing gap between rich and poor. And conducting clinical trials within such a context will raise serious ethical issues. Located in the state of Madhya Pradesh in central India, this is Bhopal. The name alone has become synonymous with the most catastrophic industrial disaster in history. Poisonous gas leaked at a pesticide factory belonging to Union Carbide, an American company now owned by Dow Chemical. This is the site where the Union Carbide gas disaster happened in 1984, and the community was traumatized. Thousands of people have died, and hundreds of thousands continue to be affected every day. They have all sorts of chronic diseases. Cancer is a problem, diabetes, the water is contaminated. Now, the US corporation has built a hospital to treat those who have survived the gas leak, but it's now becoming clear that that hospital has also become a site for clinical trials. Lakshmi and her late husband Shankar Lal lived within a few blocks of the factory when the leak happened.
तो सोते सोते एकदम उठे तो देखा तो बाहर जनता भाग रही थी। उनको जब गैस के दूसरे दिन ना बाथरूम में खून आने लगा था।
Shankar's health never improved. The last time he got sick before passing away in 2008, he went to Bhopal Memorial Hospital and Research Center, the hospital built for the survivors.
गोली दवाइयाँ दी उन्होंने, बोलने लगे ये 3 महीने छुट्टी हो गई, तो बोलने लगे ये 3 महीने तक खाना, खा के फिर पन्नी गोली वापस करना, पन्नी वापस करना हमको कागज। तो हम कि इसका क्या करोगे आप? तो कहला नहीं वो कंपनी हमें वापस भेजना पड़ती है।
The pills were ticagrelor, a medicine for heart attacks and strokes that was being tested for approval in a number of markets, including the US. AstraZeneca, the pharmaceutical company that makes the medicine, ran the trial in 43 countries. While there's no evidence linking Shankar's death to the pills, Lakshmi says her family had no idea Shankar was participating in a clinical trial. Lakshmi says she's kept all the papers from the hospital, but one thing she does not have is a consent form. She does have, however, the piece of paper that was given to her when her husband was discharged from Bhopal Memorial Hospital, and on it clearly states that one of the medication that he was given is a study drug.
In any kind of research, whether it be clinical trial or any other research, the people who are part of the study need to be told, like, look, we did this study, this is what we found, and this is how you or whoever else have contributed to improving this drug. That's never done.
The Bhopal clinical trial story surfaced when community workers at the Bhopal Group for Information and Action came across the medical records of some of the survivors showing that drug testing had taken place. Satyanath Sarangi moved here immediately following the gas leak to fight for the rights of the survivors. He helped found this clinic and has stayed here ever since.
When you combine medical treatment with clinical trials, there's always going to be a problem because there's serious conflict of interest. In many situations, treatment and clinical trial are combined. So essentially we are talking of people who have no other option, people with reduced autonomy.
More than 100 survivors participated in at least 6 different clinical trials at the Bhopal Memorial Hospital Center, earning the hospital more than 10 million rupees, or $227,000 US. The state banned all testing in public hospitals after the scandal broke. Bhopal Memorial refused to let us film inside. Fault Lines was able to bring in a small camera and speak to one of the doctors who ran the trials.
Do you have any consent forms you can show us that are filled? Well, why? You can take out the name, but just show us how the procedure of the consent form works.
No, I can't show you that because it's the first thing is it is the director's room, and even if I want, I cannot show you. And first thing is that I don't want to show you.
Why?
Because it is only open to regulatory body. We just had an inspection for about 6 days. We had tough time. We had to show them each and everything, each and every paper. They are telling that the consent is not taken. But how can you say that I was not aware? Nobody is so much illiterate. Nobody is so much illiterate who doesn't understand what is a consent and what the signatures are.
But we found a number of illiterate people who participated in the trials.
Ramadhar is 56 years old. He also says that he had no idea he was on that clinical trial at Bhopal Memorial. And we're here to hear his story.
एक कागज़ पे ज़रूर साइन कराते थे. एक कागज़ है इंग्लिश में, मैं तो इंग्लिश जानता नहीं हूँ. इंग्लिश में ज़रूर साइन कराते थे और मेरे को 2 डिब्बी दी.
Have you thought about maybe going to court?
मैडम मेरे पास पैसा नहीं मैं अब तो कोर्ट में कहा बॉम्बे में पहुंच जाता, वहाँ दुनिया में पहुंच जाता, हाई कोर्ट पहुंच जाता है. लेकिन गरीब आदमी है सब, अब पैसा कहाँ से लेके आते हैं? अपन पैसा लगाएंगे तो बच्चों को क्या खिलाएंगे?
AstraZeneca told Fault Lines there were cases where consent forms were not properly filled out. It says it doesn't know how many, and it could not confirm whether any follow-up care or compensation was provided to the patients in question.
Because we're the industry pioneer, the most trusted names in biopharma have trusted us to help develop or commercialize their products.
Another CRO that carried out clinical trials at Bhopal Memorial was Quintiles.
We are future human health. We are Quintiles.
Based in the US, Quintiles is considered the largest CRO in the world. An Indian government investigation revealed, quote, deficiencies in one of the clinical trials it conducted. Quintiles refused to confirm with Fault Lines any details of the investigation.
One US company makes people sick, and then the US pharmaceutical companies, which have very close ties, if they're not themselves chemical corporations, another US pharmaceutical company comes and tests its drugs. So we feel as if India is increasingly becoming like a colony of US corporations.
Back in the US, corporations engaged in clinical trials are represented by the Association of Clinical Research Organizations, or ACRO. The group strongly advocates for the globalization of clinical trials, claiming they need access to large populations outside of the US in order to create new medicines and vaccines.
Were you able to meet with one of the pharmas?
Doug Petticord is the executive director. He says informed consent or the agreement to participate in a clinical trial should be consistent across countries, be it in India or the United States.
Their physician has an ethical and a regulatory responsibility to ensure that their informed consent is a positive and valid one. Does that always happen? It's an issue throughout the world.
So you're fully confident that the companies that you represent, the companies that are operating in countries like India, are conducting business to the highest ethical order?
I think all of our companies are indeed committed to standards of work that are the same in India as in the US or in Europe.
Those standards are supposed to be monitored by the most powerful watchdog in the US, the Food and Drug Administration.
The Department of Health has conducted its own investigation into foreign clinical trials, and I have it here with me. In it, it says that 80% of the drugs that the FDA approved in 2008 had data from foreign clinical trials. But the FDA inspected less than 1% of these sites. This report also says that the FDA could not track all the clinical trials that were taking place because CROs did not register all of them.
What you're really talking about, fundamentally, as you say, are that people are fully informed of what's going to happen, that they give a full, free, independent, informed consent to be in there, that they have the right to ask any questions as to what's going on. They have the right to drop out anytime they wish without any penalties.
I saw firsthand illiterate poor Indians being used in clinical trials when they had no idea what was going on.
Well, I think, again, going back, as we said at the beginning, in order for us to use the data, it has to be done in accordance with international standards.
It's not, though.
Well, and I think that's the point, that if there is data, and if we're made aware of that, and if we find out, we simply will not use the data. I think, though, you have to also realize to a degree that what happens in an individual country primarily is under the oversight of that country. Our jurisdiction as the FDA ends at the U.S. border.
Dr. Lumpkin's statements are at the least misleading, and at the worst they're a lie and incorrect.
Sidney Wolf helped found Public Citizen, a nonprofit consumer interest group based in Washington.
The FDA has obviously had jurisdiction to inspect foreign drug manufacturing facilities. They have inspected foreign clinical trials. Is he saying that they're doing it illegally, or he's really trying to cover up the fact that they haven't been doing enough of it by saying they don't have jurisdiction?
The FDA says it's opening offices in a number of countries to train local regulators. They now have 11 of their personnel on the ground in India.
If there is an effort made to train and do capacity building, it's a positive thing, but that still does not measure up to the quantity or the amount of problem that we have.
Dr. Amar Jasani oversees a medical ethics research center in India. His organization catalogs violations and monitors clinical trials across the country.
Unlike, say, in the developed countries, where a lot of safeguards are provided to the people who are in the clinical trial, we don't have those safeguards ensured because the regulatory agencies are almost dysfunctional. They are not able to inspect, they don't have funds, they don't have inspectors, and there's a lot of corruption within the system.
CROs and pharmaceutical companies often pay doctors for every participant they sign up. Some Indian doctors say this creates a conflict of interest because doctors are working for both the pharmaceutical companies and their patients.
See, a doctor's first duty is towards his patient. It is not towards industrial.
Dr. Dilip Maideo used to conduct clinical trials at a private hospital in Mumbai. He decided to stop because of the alleged corruption he says he witnessed.
There are stories when kickbacks have taken place earlier in form of, appliances given free of cost to the doctors, even cars being given, and so on and so forth. And moreover, but some sponsorship for a non-clinical meeting also.
What does that mean?
Non-clinical meeting is a meeting which just go and enjoy. It's not a foreign jaunt which you have to necessarily attend a conference also. It is just a holiday that is totally sponsored.
This was one of the few CROs that allowed us to film an ongoing clinical trial, as long as we do not reveal the identities of the participants. Based in Mumbai, the CRO says for this trial, it pays people per milliliter of blood that they lose. They receive more money when the drugs have serious side effects. Off camera, staff told us that 95% of the participants are poor. The other 5% are university students.
One of the reasons that companies go to these other countries is they know that the patients are desperate. They have no medical care. Oh, I will gladly experiment with anything because at least I'll get treated. This is not the kind of circumstance that could be described even remotely as informed consent. There's an element of coercion because people are being told, do you want no medical care or are you going to participate in the experiment? Oh, I'll do the experiment because otherwise I'm not going to get anything.
For many Indians, healthcare is out of reach. At least 1 million people die every year due to a lack of adequate health care. 700 million have no access to specialists. Drug testing in India brings together a complex web of international NGOs and multinational corporations. In order to understand the origins of the next story, you need to begin here, in White House Station, New Jersey, the headquarters of Merck & Company, one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies, with global sales of $46 billion in 2010. In 2006, the FDA licensed Merck's Gardasil, the first vaccine for HPV and cervical cancer prevention. But since Gardasil's launch, sales have steadily declined, from $1.5 billion in 2007 to $988 million in 2010. Before sales began to slump, Merck teamed up with PATH. Based in Seattle, Washington, PATH is an international nonprofit organization focused on public health policy. Merck and GlaxoSmithKline, another pharmaceutical company, donated the vaccines to PATH. And with a $27.8 million grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, PATH created what it described as a demonstration project that launched in Peru, Uganda, Vietnam, and India. India has a quarter of the world's cervical cancer. There, PATH vaccinated thousands of young girls to see how the two drugs fare. The goal was to make the vaccine part of India's national healthcare system. The states of Gujarat and Andhra Pradesh were chosen. Andhra Pradesh is a large agricultural state that hugs the southeast coastline. It's known as the rice bowl of India. Mangoes, hot peppers, and cotton are all grown here. With an estimated population of 80 million, it's India's fifth largest state. Kudumula Venkatama is a farm laborer in a small village in Andhra Pradesh's Khammam district. Her daughter Sarita attended a boarding school a few hours away. She says that when her daughter came home from school for a vacation, something wasn't right.
అన్నం తిన్నా కూడా మెల్లగా లేచి దొడ్డికి వెళ్ళి వచ్చి అన్నం తిన్న తర్వాత నేను పనికి వెళ్ళిపోతానమ్మా నువ్వు ఇంటికాడ ఉండు నాన్న లక్ష్మీనారాయణ వెళ్ళిపోయిందని చెప్పేసి ఆమె ఒకటే ఇంట్లో ఉంది నేను పనికి వెళ్ళిపోయిన తర్వాత కడుపులో తిప్పుతుంది కాలు చేతులు లాగుతున్నాయి అనేసి వాళ్ళ పెద్దనాన్నల ఇంటికి వెళ్ళిపోయి అక్కడ వెళ్ళిపోయేసరికి వాళ్ళు పడిపోయింది అంట అక్కడికి వెళ్ళి.
Kudumula wasn't aware at that point that her daughter had been vaccinated as part of the demonstration project. In fact, it wasn't until after her daughter died that she found out.
టీకా గురించి అప్పుడు వాళ్ళు ఇచ్చారండి కాగితాలు ఇచ్చారు కానీ నాకు తెలియదు ఆ టీకా మీద అది వేస్తే దురద కానీ పిడిసి లాంటిది కానీ వస్తుందని మాత్రం తెలుసు.
What's the vaccination for?
గర్భకోశ క్యాన్సర్ కోసం అని వేసారని అన్నారే తప్ప మాకు అది ఎందుకు వేసారో కూడా తెలియదు.
Do you know what is cervix cancer?
నాకేం తెలియదు సార్.
Now in the death certificate it says that Sarita died on the 21st of January 2010 and a post-mortem was conducted on her a day after, and the parents say they've been trying to get a copy of that post-mortem for the last 8 months, but the hospital wouldn't give it to them.
This is the girls' school that Sarita attended. She is one of 5 girls who received Gardasil in Andhra Pradesh and died later. Here, it was the headmaster and not the parents who provided consent for Sarita and others. An interim government investigation into the subsequent deaths of some of the vaccine recipients concluded that none of the girls died from the vaccine. The causes identified included malaria, drowning, and suicide. Local health advocates complained that the investigators neglected to even speak with the parents of the girls who died to get their side of the story. We met other parents who say they too were kept in the dark. Nageshwara and Vengatama lost 2 daughters who both received Gardasil. They died 25 days apart. The parents were given a consent form for the vaccination, but both of them are illiterate.
Why did you sign? Why did you say okay and sign?
Merck refused to clarify the terms under which it provided PATH with the free medication. PATH told Fault Lines neither of the pharmaceutical companies involved designed or funded the study. Both claim that there has never been a single death associated with the vaccine. PATH also says it provided strong guidelines on informed consent and used visuals to help parents understand the project. The pamphlets we saw were heavy on text. The project was suspended by the Indian government just weeks before it was completed. The interim government report concluded that, quote, since there was no malintention, no responsibility can be fixed on one person. For many people involved, that explanation is not enough.
If I'm providing vaccine which is, and I'm going to benefit from the research that is being carried out, it is my duty, my obligation to find out what exactly is happening. Vaccine was the cause of the entire happening. And their intention to capture the market of the universal immunization in India was the cause of the entire thing. And so they cannot just wash the hands and say that they are no responsibility. No, can't be.
The parents of the deceased girls we spoke with say no one has followed up with them since their daughters' deaths.
అలా వ్యాక్సిన్ వేసి చనిపోయిందని చాలా బాధపడ్డామని ఇప్పటికి కూడా మా అమ్మాయి గురించి మర్చిపోలేకపోతున్నాం. మా ఇంటికి ఒక 2 అమ్మాయిలని చాలా ప్రేమగా చూసుకున్నాం.
The business of clinical trials is showing no signs that its global expansion is slowing down. The industry is often very secret, citing doctor-patient privilege as the main reason for not sharing information with outsiders. Over the course of our reporting, Fault Lines was routinely denied access to facilities, patient records, and interviews with key players.
Why such secrecy? What's the motivation behind such secrecy?
Business. Because drug industry is everything to do with drug business. I told you that healthcare industry is also a business. It is because the business ethics prevents or business practices prevent you from sharing information.
The actions of U.S. pharmaceutical companies at home have already cost them nearly $15 billion in fines over the past 5 years. For violations that include selling drugs that fall short of FDA standards and enticing doctors with perks and financial rewards in exchange for promoting their product. Now, the U.S. Department of Justice is conducting an industry-wide corruption investigation into overseas clinical trials. According to lawyers familiar with the case, there have been high-level discussions within the Department of Justice about payments made by clinical research organizations that violate the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. FBI agents and federal prosecutors are examining payments to assure that foreign officials are not being corrupted or bribed.
So if trials are to be conducted, and there cannot be 2 standards of trial. I mean, if trials are conducted in one way in the US or in the developed countries, the same way has to be followed, the same code has to be followed. And here we find very, very clearly a racist policy.
When we're trying to develop new drugs to treat people, we can look at 350 million people in the United States, or we can look at 7 billion people in the world. The numbers are enormously compelling.
The doctors and investigators in the foreign companies are more desperate for money. The people in these foreign countries are more desperate for medical care and for money. The ethical oversight of clinical trials in these countries is less than it is in the United States. The idea of their being inspected by the United States government is much less than it would be here. So it's ideal, and I think they are exploiting the third world enormously.